I'm simultaneously very excited and very nervous to make this video. I haven't done film related content on my channel in a very long time. I think the last film-ish video that I did was at the end of 2017. I think I did a best and worst films of 2017 video, and since then I kind of fell off of making videos altogether, and then I recently got into the swing of it again in lockdown, and I've been making just bookish videos primarily. I mean, yeah, pretty much that's all I've been making. And I feel very lucky that my channel has grown in that time. We've gained an audience of about 250 since I started uploading again this year. I'm very grateful, and so I didn't want to go against the grain, you know. I didn't want to do a different type of video and scare away all of our new people. But then, as we all know, YouTube, booktube is a very fickle game, and if you start dictating your content by what's going to get views and what's going to get you subscribers and growth, that's just not a fast track to make you happy. You just got to do the content that you want to make and the content that you would like to watch. And so that's what I'm here doing. I'm here to bring you my top 10 best films of 2020 and my top 10 worst films of 2020. So if those of you who have found my channel this year have reached this far in the video and haven't clicked off, thank you. And if you're new, you might not know that film is my other love in life. It's my other passion. I have a first class degree in practical filmmaking with a specialism in directing. I love watching films. I love writing about film. I love reading other people's thoughts on films. I love everything about film, and I would love to recommend you some of the best and chat shit about some of the worst because it's fun. So I'm going to start off with the best of the year list because that's the one that is, I guess, the most exciting to talk about. And at number 10 we have The Assistant, which is directed by Kitty Green. Yay for women directors. That's something you'll notice about my list, by the way. Quite a lot of my best of list is films directed by women, because as a young female aspiring director, those are obviously the films that I make a point of seeking out and the ones that tend to gel with me the most, which makes sense. But yeah, The Assistant is a film which kind of grew on me. My initial watching experience of it was quite underwhelming, and then the more that I thought about it after the fact, the more it kind of stuck with me, and I love it as a concept and an experiment, sort of more than a film. It was potentially the wrong film to watch the time that I watched it because I had just graduated from university into a pandemic. There were no job prospects and the industry was looking very tough, very hard to get into. And The Assistant is about a young woman who works as an assistant at a big production company, and she starts to hear sort of rumours, whispers about the main kind of executive producer, the big cheese if you like, at the production company, sort of like a Harvey Weinstein type figure. And she starts to wonder, you know, if there's anything she can do about this. She tries to take it to a superior. And the whole film is very quiet, actually. That's one of the things that struck me about it. The trailer sort of misled people in a way. It kind of looked a little bit like a sort of quiet thriller about this assistant working to like dethrone her boss. But it's really not like that at all. A lot of the film is really mundane, daily office minutiae, and you're not quite clear when this build-up is gonna break. Like, it's building up all of this suspense and tension. You're like, when is the moment? When is it gonna break? When are we gonna get this big cathartic scene where, you know, something finally happens? And it doesn't, and that's what I love about it. It like leaves you kind of in the lurch, and the screen goes black at the end, the credits roll, and you still feel like you're holding your breath and you feel very uncomfortable. It's just so well done because it's exactly how that main character must be feeling. She must have been feeling so stifled and uncomfortable, and like something was happening, something was building up to something, and then it was just this anticlimactic ending and nothing happened. The man in question doesn't receive any consequences and things go back to life as normal. I'm really interested in Kitty Green's work. I really loved her debut film, which was Casting JonBenet, which was a kind of docu-fiction film that premiered at the Berlinale, and I managed to catch it at the Berlin Film Festival that year. And The Assistant is her second feature, I believe, and both of the films have been really, really compelling, but in very different ways. And I'm really excited to see what she does next, because she always seems to find a way to reinvent the genre that she's working in. So my number 9 of the year is a bit of a cheeky one. It didn't come out in the year 2020, but I think I did pretty well. I think most other films on this list came out in the year 2020, and I had to find a different one because obviously it was harder to see films this year. I couldn't get to the cinema. So number 9 is collectively Paddington 1 and 2, which I just discovered this year, and they're as delightful as everybody says. I'm actually angry at my past self for not watching them sooner, and if you were like me and you kind of, I didn't scoff at them, but I was kind of like, oh yeah, you know, I know what that is, it's like a cute, charming bear movie. There's so much more than that. And so if you're like me and you haven't jumped on the Paddington train, just give it a chance. Just give it a chance, trust me. My number 8 of the year is Harley Quinn Birds of Prey, which is directed by Kathy Yan, another young woman director, so yay for her, we stan. And I just had so much fun watching Birds of Prey. Sure, tonally, structurally, it was a little bit of a mess. The beginning kind of zips around in a lot of different places, and there could have been a more cohesive way of setting up that story. But once I was in it, once we kind of got all of the exposition and the setup out of the way, about a third of the way, and I was like, I get it, I'm on board. Amazing. I love the costume design, I love the visuals, I love the unapologetic sense of fun about it. I love Harley's character growth, you know, going from just the Joker's obsessive sidekick to this woman who, you know, becomes a sort of mentor-like figure and doesn't need no man. And it's a bit cliche, it's a bit like girl power, but you know, we all need a bit of girl power sometimes, and when it's done this technically well, I think there's nothing to complain about, really, is there? My number 7 best film of the year is Da 5 Bloods by Spike Lee, which is a wonderful film, and it's one of Chadwick Boseman's last performances. It's not his last one, I think it was his penultimate performance before Ma Rainey's Black Bottom. Another great film, but it's not on my list, but another great film you should see. Da 5 Bloods follows 4 black men who return to Vietnam after serving in the Vietnam War in their youth to find some buried gold and also a fallen comrade. And it's really hard to make a movie about the Vietnam War without invoking Apocalypse Now, which is Francis Ford Coppola's obviously very famous film about and set during the Vietnam War. But what is so great about Da 5 Bloods is that it absolutely leans into that. It completely invokes Apocalypse Now, but in a way that doesn't feel like self-referential or like wink wink nudge nudge. It does it in a way that feels like a love letter to Apocalypse Now, and it adds to the already rich texture of that film, and it offers a different perspective of the black men that fought in the Vietnam War whose stories aren't told. And the performances are incredible. Chadwick Boseman is notable, but also every single one of the ensemble cast really brings their A game. The visuals are beautiful, and it's just such a gripping film. I think it's over 2 hours long, but honestly I didn't feel a second of that runtime. As soon as it was over, I wanted more, you know, I was like, wait, what? It's finished? The soundtrack is also absolutely beautiful. My dad's very into music, he works in music, and he has a huge vinyl collection, so we have a little tradition that every birthday and every Christmas I will buy him a vinyl film soundtrack, because that's like a meshing of both of our interests. It's like a vinyl for him, but also a film soundtrack, so it's like the perfect little present. And this year for his birthday in August, I got him the soundtrack to Da 5 Bloods, and it is just gorgeous. He's been playing it in the house all the time, and it's beautiful. My number 6 film of the year was Emma, another film directed by a woman. You can see a pattern emerging here. Emma is directed by Autumn de Wilde, and Emma is her debut feature film, and I think primarily she worked as a photographer before turning her hand to directing, and you can absolutely tell in the way that Emma is realised, the way that the vision comes to life, the way it's shot, the costumes, the production design, the colours, the palette. It's all like a photographer's palette. Basically, you can see that every single frame was designed as if it was like a still photograph. It's lush. I think that's the way I would describe it. Completely lush. And I'm not usually a period gal. And I'm not usually a period piece gal. I don't tend to do Pride and Prejudice. I'm not a Jane Austen stan, unfortunately. I'm not mad about Jane Eyre. I'm not a huge classics, period drama, big epic story type person, but Emma was delightful, and I loved watching it just for the designs and the performances as well. The performances, I don't even know how to describe it. It's that kind of dramatic period piece drama, but also it's sort of slightly cynical and a bit sarcastic. I wouldn't say it's a parody, but it sort of toes that line, and it's just very enjoyable and just completely divine to look at. My number 5 film of the year was Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always, another female-led project directed by Eliza Hittman. This is another film that has silently grown on me more since I watched it. So this film had gotten quite a lot of festival buzz and quite a lot of praise on the indie circuit, and I'd heard that it was about a 16-year-old girl who has to travel kind of cross-country, cross-state lines in order to get an abortion. And then I watched the film, and it is just that. I think mentally I had been preparing for something more, you know, like what's her family like, or you know, her friendships and whatever, and I had to almost convince myself to get out of that initial headspace of disappointment, because I did feel disappointed when I watched it. I thought, oh, is it just her getting an abortion? Like, that's it. I don't know anything about, you know, who she is as a person, what her kind of home life is like. There are things that are hinted at, but it's not really fleshed out in that sense. It's a very quiet film. There are long periods of silence. There are long periods where no dialogue at all happens, and then when dialogue does happen, it's very surface level. And it really took me a couple of days after having seen the film to really appreciate that. So I wrote a long rambling review of this film, which I can link in the description if you want to read it. And by the way, if you want to hear more of my film opinions and see what I'm watching, you can follow me on Letterboxd, which I will link down below. I have loved other films directed by women such as Lady Bird and Booksmart, where the leading ladies dazzle and are charming and complex, and I've instantly felt a connection with them and felt so seen. Eliza Hittman subverts this likeable and relatable trope for a female-led coming-of-age movie. Not that Autumn, the protagonist, is unlikable. She just stays pretty quiet for a lot of the film, and there aren't many scenes through which we learn more about her, her hopes, her dreams, and her desires. She remains at a distance, almost acting as an everywoman, as if by holding back on expressing Autumn's defining characteristics and the people in her life, Hittman is communicating that this could be any girl, any young woman who is left untethered and meandering in the face of unwanted pregnancy. If I were to pick one word to describe this film, it would be subtle. The subtle subversion of the female-led coming-of-age narrative, the subtle depiction of small-town America, the subtle commentary on America's healthcare system. Hittman doesn't give much away in terms of stating whether these things are good or bad or what she'd like to change about them, but we simply see Autumn traversing through the system, taking every complication and every hurdle quietly and with dignity. The film is full of small gestures. A nurse holding Autumn's hand, Autumn's outreached hand to her cousin. In a way, this film is also a hand reaching out to the many women who have faced this, who have felt lost and silent, unable to verbalize their pain. It is also shot beautifully. I think maybe it was shot on film. It certainly looks like it. I think it was. This old-fashioned, almost sepia-toned nostalgia at first made me try to guess when this was set, until Autumn pulled out a smartphone that told me it was modern day. A confirmation of her age and birth date later in the film made it clear that it was set in 2019. This cinematography makes the film feel timeless. This has been happening for so long and will continue to happen. Furthermore, the nostalgia evoked by the visual style emphasizes how outdated this feels, that women scraping together funds and traveling in secret for the basic human right to her own body should be a thing of the past. But it isn't. Upon finishing this film, I admit I was a little underwhelmed. This had received so much hype, and I was expecting, like I had outlined in the beginning of this review, a little bit more in terms of plot. Then I fought that feeling, because this was the perfect way to tell this story. No distractions, no hitting you over the head with commentary about the broken system, although it manages that anyway. It's a soft yet brutally honest, somehow comforting extension of compassion to anyone who has felt this way, to anyone who has been where Autumn is. I hope it makes them feel less alone. And that's that. My number 4 film of the year was And Then We Danced, and this video is probably getting crazy long because I was about to look up my review for And Then We Danced, which is also crazy long, and I don't want to read that out again. But And Then We Danced is a Georgian film, and for those who don't know, my mother is Georgian. I was born in Georgia, and I have family in Georgia still. I go occasionally to visit, and it's a very interesting place, but somewhat outdated in terms of rights for women, rights for gay people, for black people. It feels like a place often stuck in the past, and so I often grapple with my sort of Georgian heritage in the sense that it doesn't often feel like a heritage I want to claim, because a lot of the beliefs that are so entrenched in Georgian society aren't the beliefs that I hold. In fact, they're direct opposite to the beliefs that I hold. But And Then We Danced is a film that gave me hope. It is a beautiful coming of age, coming out sort of story. It follows a young dancer who is exploring his sexuality, realising he is gay, and learning to accept that about himself. It is shot absolutely beautifully, it is gorgeous, and Georgian dance is such a staple of society. Georgian dance is this big traditional dance, you know, the music is very traditional, the big costumes are very traditional, it's this big staple of society. And to see this young gay man express himself and his femininity through the traditional lens of very macho, very male Georgian dance was such a beautiful dichotomy. Like, his dance teacher keeps telling him to be like manly and strong, and you know, when he's dancing with the girls, that he gets kind of admonished for being too feminine, that he has to be strong and like the man in the dance, and he often, you know, takes the more like kind of feminine like movement style. But the fact that he then uses this Georgian dance as the vehicle for his exploration of himself and his sexuality is just gorgeous. It's just so well done, and the ending of that film was one of the most cathartic endings I've seen in a very long time, and it was beautifully done, and I really recommend it. My number 3 film of the year was Pixar's Soul, which I knew from early reviews at LFF that it would knock me out. It's what we've come to expect from Pixar. It is absolutely stunning, and I shed many tears, and it's beautifully animated, and for those pursuing the creative path the way that I am, you know, wanting to get into film or get into writing or whatever it is, for those who are pursuing a creative path, you're often told that you must live and breathe your art, right? It has to be your passion, your reason for being, you know, you have to do it because you need to, not because you want to, because why else would you choose to suffer the way that creatives suffer, you know, a life of rejection and a life of vulnerability. So for a lot of creatives, your purpose, your reason for being becomes your productivity, your output, right? And Soul is a film that tries to dispel that belief, and one quote or one line or one idea that has really stuck with me is, your purpose is not your spark. Your purpose, what you were put here to do, is not your reason for living. Your reason for living is your spark, it's your engagement in the world around you, it's the relationships that you form, it's eating a piece of pizza and watching autumn leaves fall down. It sounds cliche, but it's true, and it's beautiful. There has been some criticism of the portrayal of the kind of black experience in Pixar Soul, because obviously Pixar is a traditionally white company who have hired traditionally white creatives to work on their films, so I will link to a couple of Own Voices reviews, because obviously that's very important to pay attention to. But ultimately I still believe that this film is worth seeing, and even whilst being critical of certain elements of it, such as the body swapping trope or the transformation trope, which appears in a lot of films with black protagonists, animated films with black protagonists, I think it is still worth seeing, and you can still gain something from it whilst being mindful of the ways in which Pixar could do better next time when portraying black characters. And my second best film of the year was another beautiful animated film called Wolfwalkers, which I managed to catch on Apple Plus. But yeah, it's been hard to track down new films this year. I've really had to jump through the loops. But Wolfwalkers is absolutely stunning. It's by the same little animation studio that did The Breadwinner and Song of the Sea, neither of which I've seen, but I would love to at some point, and I will do at some point. But Wolfwalkers is absolutely stunning. It draws on It draws on Irish mythology, it has wolves in it, it has these two charming, beautiful little girls that can shift into wolves, and it's just absolutely gorgeous. I just don't know how else. It's beautifully delivered and drawn. The way that the wolves move is like running water, the music is gorgeous, it just fills you with that unadulterated joy that comes from being a kid, basically. But it also doesn't stray away from kind of darker themes of you know, what we're doing to nature and the impact that humans are having on nature, and the kind of reasons for that, like power and money and politics and stuff, but it does it in a way that is very beautiful. It's a gorgeous film. I don't really know what else to say. It left me speechless. And my number 1 film of the year was, drumroll. This is why I need like a proper editing person to edit my videos, because you know I'm not going to be able to put a drum roll in the edit, so That's gonna have to do. Shirley! Shirley was stunning. Directed by Josephine Decker. Another class A woman in the film industry. Shirley was stunning, and I don't want to use the word biopic because I feel like when someone says biopic you get a really annoying image in your head of like Bohemian Rhapsody or like Judy, neither of which I liked. I've not actually seen Bohemian Rhapsody, but I didn't like Judy very much. Because biopics often feel restrained, right? Especially if the person is still alive. You know, they have to hit certain points in history. They can't stray too much from like the truth. But what I love about Shirley is that it doesn't care about that, really. So I should explain that Shirley is obviously in reference to Shirley Jackson. I should have made that clear. So Shirley Jackson, a very famous author, very famous for writing creepy, gothic, haunting stories. She wrote The Haunting of Hill House, and also The Lottery, We Have Always Lived in the Castle. But this film doesn't take the predictable route of following Shirley from her birth and her childhood to the beginning of her career, the middle of her career, and then her death. We don't have that annoying, predictable trajectory. We hone in on a section of her life where she is struggling to write. She's just published The Lottery. For the first time she is starting to be recognised as an acclaimed author, and her husband also writes and he works at the university, so they attend lots of kind of soirees of intellectual people talking about intellectual things, and Shirley is very bored by this life and she struggles so much with writer's block. And then we follow this young newlywed couple who comes to live in the house for a bit, and it's just about how this young woman, I've forgotten her name, kind of brings something out in Shirley. And we follow Shirley as she begins to write a story about a local missing girl, and it is so beautifully done. Shirley's house itself is a cornucopia of just good vibes. That is not the way to describe it, but it is like every Pinterest girl's dream. There's beautiful dried flowers, endless bookshelves, amazing crockery, amazing prints, amazing colours all throughout the house. It just feels like such a textured, like living, breathing space where anything can happen. It's just so palpable, this atmosphere. And it's one of those films that I know will get a lot of stick. Well, not stick, but just people being like, oh, that was so boring, like nothing happened. Sure, like if you went out to write the plot of every single detail that happens, yes, not a lot happens, but that's not grounds to dismiss the film. It creates this palpable energy. It's like buzzing, it's fizzing, and it's about inspiration and lack thereof, and what we're interested in, what we draw from, and it's just this little window into a small section of Shirley Jackson's life, and it's not beholden to what she actually did or what she actually said. It's a lot more imaginative and it almost feels like a dream. It's very much not beholden to fact. And I love that about it. It just feels like you've fallen into one of Shirley Jackson's books, and I think that was the point. Elizabeth Moss playing Shirley is astounding, and Michael Stuhlbarg playing her husband is equally as impressive, and it is just a wonderful, wonderful film by people at the very height of their craft, and I urge you to seek it out as soon as you can. And now we're on to the worst list, the worst films I saw this year. We're gonna start off at number 10, The Dead Don't Die by Jim Jarmusch. Not got a lot to say about it. Like, this section of the worst films is probably going to be significantly shorter than the section of the best films, because then obviously in the best section I gushed about how great everything was, and then in the worst section I'm going to be like, there's not much of note, so what am I going to talk about? The Dead Don't Die is a zombie film, and it just didn't work for me. It has Adam Driver and Bill Murray. I think on paper it would have worked and it should have worked, but just something didn't click with the tone. It was trying to be a comedy, but then it wasn't funny enough to be a comedy, and I just don't think it kind of knew what it wanted to be. And Jim Jarmusch is a very celebrated director, and I have liked his other work, but this one just didn't vibe, didn't gel with me for some reason. And I will add that not all of the films on this list came out in 2020, because obviously my pool of films to pick from for my rankings was a lot smaller this year because I didn't get to the cinema as much as I would have liked to because of, you know, pandemic. So there will be films on here that are not 2020 releases. Number 9 was a 2020 release, I think, on Netflix called Lost Girls, and it was like an adaptation, a fictionalized adaptation of like a real thing that happened, but it was like a true crime thing. It was like a girl that was abducted and murdered, and I just was watching it thinking like I would much rather be watching the documentary version because it just didn't feel respectful, which is weird because I thought it had been written and, like, you know, directed by a man, but then I found out it wasn't, and that kind of confused me a bit because it just didn't feel like any of these girls were portrayed respectfully. It didn't feel like they were real people. They felt like, you know, stereotypes or ideas of what we imagine missing girls to be. I don't know. It just didn't gel with me. And honestly, this is going to be very short because I don't have a lot to say on each of these, because obviously they're films that I didn't like, and when I don't like something, I tend to erase it from my brain so that I have more room for the things that I did like. I'm like Marie Kondo, but for my brain. Like, I just get rid of the stuff that does not spark joy, and I just hold space for the stuff that does. Number 8 was Countdown, and there's nothing particularly wrong with Countdown. It's like a kind of schlocky horror thing where basically there's an app that counts down to the day that you're gonna die, and it's accurate, and then people start freaking out and trying to stop it from happening, obviously. Otherwise it'd be no film. And there's nothing particularly bad about it. I mean, it's generic, it's forgettable, but the biggest sin of, I think, a horror film is that it's boring. You know, if you're a horror film, your job essentially is to create a sense of atmosphere, to create a sense of unease, to make an impression, right? And if you don't do that, and it didn't even make an impression in like a fun way, as in like, I remember that film because it was funny bad. It was just boring, and I feel like for me that's the biggest sin. If a film is terrible, I can appreciate it because it's probably trying something and it failed. But if a film doesn't try anything and it's just boring, then that's just worse for me. That's my biggest bugbear with film, I think. Number 7 was Misbehaviour, which was meant to be like a feminist film, and it just did not pass the test for me. It just wasn't good. It's trying to be a feel-good film about a serious issue in the way that Pride was a feel-good film about the struggles of the gay community. Misbehaviour is trying to be a feel-good film about the struggles of the feminist movement, and it just doesn't pull it off somehow. None of the characters feel real or fleshed out. They just seem to be saying things to get them to the next plot point. They try and address issues of race within feminism, and it just feels very heavy-handed and like, oh right, we've ticked that box, no one can call us racist, or like, you know, not intersectional now, we've ticked that box, we've dealt with that. It's just very surface level, and it kind of ends in that way of like, oh, feminism is great and like misogyny got fixed, when it obviously didn't, right? It's a very kind of like sanitized version of events, and I just don't think that's necessary. You can still be a compelling, honest film about misogyny whilst having funny jokes in it. It doesn't have to be all feel good and skirt away from anything real, you know? Number 6 on this list was How to Build a Girl, which is really sad because this should be everything I love. It's coming of age, it has a music subplot, it follows this young girl, Hannah? Is her name Hannah? I honestly don't know. Who is very dissatisfied with her kind of boring day-to-day life in Wolverhampton, and then she reinvents herself and becomes this rock critic, and she gets very famous by basically panning and writing really scathing reviews, and then she has to deal with the ramifications of that, of becoming famous in that way. And it has Beanie Feldstein in it, and she is the best part of it. She really gives it her all, and you know, she is the thing that I liked most about the film, but again, the writing just fell flat for me. The screenplay was written by Caitlin Moran, who wrote the novel, and I feel like some things that would have worked in the novel she tried to translate to the screen and they just did not work. For example, there's a scene in a bathroom where like her inner voice manifests itself as like a celebrity or something, and she talks to them in the bathroom, and it would have worked I think in a novel because it's like someone, you know, is inside their head and they're expressing their thoughts, but on screen it just looked like a really lazy way to try and get a character to speak about their internal thoughts. I don't know, it was filled with little moments like that. They just felt a bit jarring and a bit clumsy, and ultimately I just didn't enjoy it. Number 5 for me was Jingle Jangle, and I feel really bad because a lot of people really love this, and I know that it's serving an important purpose, and a lot of like Black owned voices reviewers have said that they've loved this film, they love seeing themselves in a beautifully made Christmas movie, and I love that. I love that for you. It just didn't work for me, and I'm so sad because it had so much potential. The costumes are gorgeous, and honestly, the costume designer's back must hurt like hell from carrying this entire film, because there's not a lot else that was notable about it for me. It's a musical, none of the songs left an impression. I'm a big musical theatre fan, and usually on my first listen of a musical I can remember, or at least pick out at least 2 or 3 songs I'd like to go back and listen to again. Like in the middle of Jingle Jangle, whilst I was watching it, I couldn't tell you what the musical numbers had been, and after it finished, no memory of them at all. And there was just too much going on. There was like this family plotline of this, you know, grumpy granddad who didn't want to engage with his granddaughter. There was a financial plotline of the bank coming to his house every day, because isn't there always in a Christmas movie? But then there's also the plotline with his like arch nemesis who used to be his apprentice that stole from him. And then there's this robot plotline about this magic robot design, and there's just too much going on, and I think it would have been so much better if they'd focused on a story, filtered out some of the songs and made the ones that were there more impactful, and then you would have a beautifully designed, aesthetic, gorgeous, you know, film that feels like it's about real people. I know realism isn't what they're striving for in a Christmas film, but it just felt lazy. Like, and as an aspiring filmmaker, it just makes me sad to see how many millions must have been pumped into this movie. Like, you can tell just by looking at it how much they've spent on it, and it could be improved with such easy tweaks, and they just haven't. And I think it just strikes you as lazy. Like, you had all this money and all these resources, and yet this film didn't reach its full potential. It's really sad. Because I love Christmas movies, and I love steampunk, and I love all of that stuff, and it had so much potential, and I think that's why it disappointed me so much, was because I expected to love it and I just didn't. Number 4 was Artemis Fowl. Need I say anything? That was awful, and I haven't even read the book, so it wasn't like, oh, I love the books and they just did a shoddy job of adapting it. I was just watching it purely from like, as a film, this is structurally insane. So much happened in such a short space of time, and honestly, I couldn't tell you any of it. It was just so much. And honestly, not to bring politics into this, but the kid who plays Artemis Fowl just looked so much like a Tory MP, and I feel like that just got in the way of like me being able to sympathise with him at all. And who let the mouth thing happen? Like, who was behind that? Because they need to be fired, and I would like to take their job, please. Actually, no. I mean, I want a job in the industry, but maybe I'm not willing to stoop that low. Right, life is not on my side because my card just filled up, so I had to transfer everything to my laptop, and then I realised that a huge section of what I just filmed was slightly out of focus, and I'm not done, and now I've put my camera back and now my battery's flashing at me. So maybe it's kind of cathartic that the last bit that I have to film is still talking about the worst films, because while I'm frazzled and stressed, I can just let out all of my anger at all of the films that were not great this year. So we did Jingle Jangle, so that means we did Artemis Fowl. So we're on number 3, which was The Prom, aka the straightest gay movie I've ever seen in my life. I've said before, I'm a huge fan of musical theatre, I'm a huge fan of movies, I'm a huge fan of Meryl Streep, I'm a huge fan of LGBTQ+ representation in media. This should have worked for me. Oh boy, it did not. It did not at all. How is this a gay movie, or a movie for the gays, when Meryl Streep and her weak-ass male love interest, and they have no chemistry, can I just say? There is no build-up there at all. Like, it's just so unnecessary. They share a kiss before the lesbians who are allegedly at the centre of this narrative. And this is also compounded by the casting of James Corden, who, by the way, I respect in other circles. I think he's a fine talk show host. He was good on Gavin and Stacey, but he does not need to be playing the role of a gay man when in his career he has kind of monetized and furthered his career of being like this camp stereotype, but then ultimately he's a straight man and unthreatening, so people accept him and like allow him to be camp, but then actual actors that are gay don't get the same notoriety and like respect that James Corden does. It just doesn't sit right with me, and the fact that he was cast doesn't sit right with me. I think the main lesbian couple in the film The Prom have absolutely no chemistry. I know nothing about either of those girls other than the fact that they are gay, and the mean girls that make fun of them for being gay actually have more chemistry and look more natural together than the alleged gay couple. I just don't get it. And I know that the lighting choices were meant to be like pride colours and it was meant to be haha, but it just was garish, it was heavy-handed, it just felt like the absolute straightest possible lens on this story. And I just didn't enjoy it at all. I just didn't think it did anything for me. And if Meryl Streep giving it her all is not enough to save your movie, it's a pretty terrible movie. My second worst film of the year was Siberia, which I don't even know how to talk about this one. It's basically meant to be an artsy, abstract, vague and the afterlife is just a bunch of random crap. Like women he's had sex with, someone shooting someone in the head while heavy music plays, heavy rock metal music plays, just some huskies. It's just bizarre, and not in a way that makes you want to figure out what it's trying to say, because it is one of those films that has that veneer of like, we're saying something important, and then you dig and you dig and you try and you try, and there's just nothing there. Like, I'm sorry. It didn't work for me at all, which is annoying because I saw it at the online version of the BFI Film Festival this year, and I watched it after me and Mum had just watched Shirley, so it was like a huge come down. We were like, woo, Shirley, films are amazing, this is so exciting, and then we watched Siberia and we're like, oh. And potentially the worst film ever. I'm not going to be that dramatic. My camera is just not having a good time today. It is Wild Mountain Thyme, and we're not going to spend too long on this because I want to erase this from my brain as soon as possible. It is terrible, and it's almost made worth it by the absolutely insane twist, which if you haven't heard, I'm going to spoil it, so if you don't want to know. Throughout the film, there's this push and pull between this farmer, these two Irish farmers, or they own adjoining land or something. One of them's Jamie Dornan, one of them's Emily Blunt doing a sketchy Irish accent, and then there's also Christopher Walken doing a sketchy Irish accent. It's just, whew, it's a lot. And then there's this push and pull between Emily Blunt and Jamie Dornan, and it's like she's in love with him and she thinks it's like a prerequisite that they're destined to be married, it's just a matter of time, but he's like doesn't want to speak to her, he's kind of solitary on his own, and then it comes to a head right at the end of the film. So there's a whole long film of just like glances and like nothing much happening at all, just petty farm drama. And me and my boyfriend are watching it like, when is this big twist happening? What is everyone talking about? And then the conversation at the end, Emily Blunt finally confronts him. She's like, everyone expects us to be married. What's going on? Why are you shutting me out? Are you a homosexual? And then he's like, no, I'm not homosexual. And she's like, well, what is it then? What is your dark and twisted secret? I can handle it. Tell me your secret, and then we can finally be together. And then no word of a lie, he looks at her and he says, I think I'm a honeybee. This man genuinely believes that he is a bee, and then it flashes back to like earlier points in the film where he was like sniffing flowers and shit. Like, it's not even done as a joke, like he genuinely thinks he's a bee. And then she gets over that pretty quickly. She's like, well, that's fine, I often feel like a swan. And then like they go out to this field, they kiss in the rain, and then the film ends with them singing a song together, like a classic Irish folk song. And then the credits roll and you are left thinking, Have I just hallucinated that whole thing? Did I accidentally take a drug that I didn't know I was inhaling or something, and this is the result, and I'm gonna wake up and like Google it and find out there's actually not a film called Wild Mountain Thyme, and that thankfully it wasn't real. But no, it is real. It is real. And I'd also like to add, it's personally quite heartbreaking because my boyfriend sometimes called me honeybee as like a term of endearment, you know, and that's completely fucking ruined now. So thanks, whoever directed that mess. And I think this year it's been particularly hard for me to watch bad movies because I am sat as a new film graduate aching to get into the film industry, and then I see these big budget trash fire films getting made and I'm like, why can't I get a job? If these people are in the industry making whatever they fucking want, what am I doing wrong? Like, the film industry makes you feel like you need to be exceptional to even be considered, to even have it deign to open a door to you, and then you see stuff like Wild Mountain Thyme get released and you're like, the bar isn't that high, clearly. Jesus. So anyway, this video is probably centuries long, and if you've stuck with it, if you're watching it now and you're here with me, thank you so much for listening to my ramblings. I really appreciate you, and thanks for giving me that sweet watch time. And please let me know what your favourite and least favourite films of 2020 were. I'm so excited to chat about it in the comments, and I will see you soon with another video soon. Bye.